What do 2021-2022 season expectations look like for Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Zuccarello? Plus, the Minnesota Wild won their first preseason game. We recap that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. And as a reminder, Locked On Wild is free and available everywhere you listen to podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. You can visit rockauto.com and make sure to tell them Locked On sent you. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will recap some of the observations from the Wild's first win of the preseason, a 3-1 win over the Colorado Avalanche. And we'll also start to look at our season expectations for everybody that is going to make the Wild's opening night roster, plus a few players that have a good chance to do so as well. That will be coming up over the next few days leading up to the start of the season next week. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, veteran of over 10 years of Minnesota sports coverage, including the last couple of seasons covering exclusively your Minnesota Wild, and happy to have you along for my first full season of Minnesota Wild coverage here at Locked On Wild. Let's get into some of the observations from the preseason before we look at season expectations. And by the time we're done listening to today's episode, you are going to be able to answer the following questions about the top three players for the Minnesota Wild on offense: Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Zuccarello. You'll be able to answer: what constitutes a successful season? Can these players beat their 2021-2022 season projections? And are there any concerns with each player leading up to the start of the season? Those are the three questions we're going to try to drill into everybody's head with the players all up and down this roster. And so we will do that. But first, a 3-1 win for the Minnesota Wild to start off the preseason slate, their third game of the preseason, picking up win number one. Now, there is a little bit to be taken from this game, but also we do need to consider the fact that the Avalanche really didn't bring anybody with for the game. Trying to get some looks at a lot of depth players that could be pivotal for the Avalanche to fill out the roster, but did not bring a full complement of players to take on the Wild, who countered with basically their starting lineup, or what we expect that will look like for the most part, come the 15th when the season starts. And so it all led to the Wild winning by a score of 3-1. We saw Kirill Kaprizov with a nifty goal, Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon both with tallies as well, and some other numbers to take into consideration. Kirill Kaprizov with 2 assists, Matt Zuccarello with 2 assists, Joel Eriksson Ek with an assist as well. So 6 points by that new top line for the Wild: Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek, and Zuccarello. And by all accounts, I should preface, due to the Bally Sports North situation and not getting my parents' updated login info, did not have a chance to watch the game, but we'll get that corrected before the season starts. But from all accounts of those that were at the game and those that were following it as well, that line was doing some pretty nice things throughout the course of the night. So really excited to see what that line can do, and we'll talk about them here for the rest of the show. Kevin Fiala also making some noise. Had a couple of opportunities to score, just couldn't quite do it. The big one, though, and we kind of singled him out last week, Jordan Greenway had a nice bounce back performance for the Wild. And so that is something definitely that we are excited about. And hopefully that leads to him kind of getting things back on track. Some interesting comments by Dean Evison after the game, kind of suggesting that Greenway has maybe been coasting a little bit through his last couple of seasons of play, and finally kind of got that wake up call message that that may lead to him finally unlocking his full potential heading into the season. So that was certainly nice to hear. And Capo Kakinen wasn't super tested, but had a couple of saves that he needed to make that were a little bit on the difficult side. And it all leads to a nice, clean little win, and great to have fans back at the XL Energy Center. So looking forward to the last couple of preseason games before we gear up for the start of the regular season, which I think is going to be a pretty good one for the Minnesota Wild. So that is kind of some of the things that we take from the preseason win yesterday for the Wild. Now, one interesting note, and we did get a little bit of clarification from Michael Russo on it. No Marco Rossi in the Monday night preseason game. Did not make the trip. Was not on the roster for preseason game number 3. Although it does sound like he will play on Wednesday, so we'll get a look at Rossi, which I hope leads to more of a conversation about him making the team. It looks as though, based off of how he was used tonight, that Matt Boldy is trending more and more towards making the team outright, which would be great for him to kind of speed up his path to the NHL. So no Rossi, but he should play on Wednesday and probably will play on Wednesday. And so that leaves open the possibility for him to still make this Wild roster before the season starts. So little bit of conglomeration of thoughts after the Wilds pick up a 3-1 win in their third preseason game. We will get to our player expectations for 2021-2022. We'll answer those 3 burning questions about Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Zuccarello before today's episode is done. More to come here on today's episode of Locked On Wild. Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there is no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Hey, Wild fans, this is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about. It's called Get Upside. My listeners are making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Make sure to use the promo code HOCKEY and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the pumps anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use the promo code HOCKEY to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use the promo code HOCKEY to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code HOCKEY at GetUpside. Continuing our conversation here on today's episode of Locked On Wild, gearing now towards player expectations for 2021-2022. And as mentioned, we are going to answer the following questions about what should be the top line for the Wild this season. What constitutes a successful season? Can they beat their projections? And are there any concerns heading into the season? So let's start with Kirill Kaprizov, who is going to be the anchor. Again, he's going to be the one that leads this offense. And as he goes, the team goes. So for Kirill, I mean, there really was not a lot that we didn't get from him in 2020, 2021. Ended up winning the Calder Trophy, 27 goals, and had 51 points in 55 games. So honestly, for him, it's going to be a lot of more of the same for Kaprizov in 2021, 2022. But in terms of what constitutes a successful season for Kaprizov, let's look at the things that needed to be accomplished before the season started. You had the contract extension for Kaprizov. Was he going to stick around for a long time, or was he going to sign more of a bridge deal and go to free agency quicker? He signed the 5-year deal, so now Kaprizov is locked up for the next 5 years at $9 million per season. A very, very good deal for him. Is that going to impact his performance now that he has? You see it across all sports. Once players go from being in a contract year to being locked into a long-term deal, sometimes they tend to get a little comfortable and their performance may not be up to the level that it was when they were auditioning for however many other teams were going to try to lock them up in free agency. Is that going to be something that we have to watch with Kirill Kaprizov? I don't get the sense that that's going to become as much of a factor, considering he is going into year 2 in the league. But in terms of a successful season for Kaprizov, I think we have to look at what he did in terms of 51 points in 55 games. And you want to see that level of production and performance extrapolated over the course of an 82-game season. Now, there are a lot of factors that play into this. Health. Is he going to be a guy that can give you, 75 to 82 games a season? 50 games, 55 games on the season out of 59 is pretty darn good. And some of those were just rest days. So that is a good percentage for him of being in games and being ready to go for this team. Obviously, a lot of the goals that he scored as well were in critical situations late in games. I keep going back to that game against the Vegas Golden Knights, in which he scored the game-tying goal and then was pivotal in the play in getting Jonas Brodin the game winner. That game, the Wild won 6-5. So his ability to stay on the ice, his ability to produce at critical points in the game, a successful season for Kirill Kaprizov is going to be to take his production and somehow bring it to the next level. There's a lot of talk about him not having a center up to his caliber of play with Victor Rask. That problem also has been righted if Joel Eriksson Ek is going to be the one that slots next to him on that top line. That problem is taken care of. We're going to need to see some numbers from Kirill Kaprizov very close to that almost a point per game for this Wild team in order for this to be considered a success. We can't have any sort of a sophomore slump, or we can't have what happened at the end of the Vegas series where the Golden Knights just doubled and basically took him out of the game to where he took the whole offense down by simply having him being neutralized by the Golden Knights. He has to be matchup proof for the most part. And yes, I understand that there are going to be some times where a hot goalie, a good defense on the other end of the ice, and especially those forwards that line up against him that are good defensively themselves, there are going to be nights where it's going to be difficult for him to get onto the score sheet with goals and assists. But, I think that's one of the things that set him apart so much last year was his ability to influence plays when he wasn't scoring himself. We need more of that. If we can get Kaprizov to right around a point per game, and if it's under that, that's fine. But those types of numbers where he's impacting the play on a nightly basis, and if he can be matchup proof as a go-to option for this team, then I think we can call that season a success. As far as numbers go, now I should preface that we're pulling the numbers projections from a couple of different spots. So, based off of 82 games played in 2022, Kaprizov is projected for 40 goals and 37 assists. So, a 77 points in 82 games pace, which right about the pace that he played at last year. And so, our second question, can he outdo his projected numbers this season? And I'm going to say that he can. I think Kaprizov can certainly exceed those numbers if he gets a great play from Joel Eriksson Ek, who we'll talk about in a second. If Eriksson Ek increases his play, and we get, from all accounts, what has been a phenomenal preseason for Matt Zuccarello. If we get increased play from him now that he's had the full off season to get healthy, then Kaprizov starts to get into that 80, 90 point range that I think he's certainly capable of. Is it going to surprise me if we see 45 goals from Kaprizov this year with 35, 40 assists? Not in the slightest. And if he does that, this Wild team's going to have a great season. He's going to have a great season as well. So basically, what it boils down to is, okay, Kirill, we've given you these things that you were looking for, and Joel Eriksson Ek is going to be a better center for you. So that has been taken care of. You got the contract extension. That has been taken care of. So now it's time for him to return the favor on the ice by doing more of what he did and being more dominant than he was on the ice last year. And if he can do all of that, then he is going to have a successful season. The Wild will be successful. He will outpace those production projections that he is sitting for, that 77-point pace in 82 games. He does that, everybody's happy, and then you start to get into consideration for some awards that are a little bigger than the Calder Trophy. And the final question for Kaprizov is, are there any concerns heading into the season? I kind of keyed in on him a little bit in that, I worry that more teams are going to try to do to him what the Vegas Golden Knights did at the end of that playoff series, where they basically just double him and keep him out of the play. And I worry about that kind of frustrating him and leading to turnovers and mistakes on the ice. But as I said before, with Joel Eriksson Ek on this top line, I think that's going to help substantially, because that adds a defensive presence to the line, and it adds some physicality as well that can help that top line take some of those shots that teams will give on them to try to knock them off their game, and they can dish it back. So all in all, for Kaprizov, let's see more of the same we saw last year. Let's see it kicked to a higher gear now that he has some of the things that he asked for in the offseason taken care of. And at that point, I think everybody goes home happy pretty much every night that there's a game. So That's what I'm thinking for Kaprizov. If you have a bold prediction as to how many goals you think Kirill Kaprizov is going to end up with, leave a comment on YouTube, and we will shout those out um, later on in the week. Just leave a comment with how many goals you think Kaprizov's going to end up with. I think 40 to 45 sounds like a really nice number for him this year. So just leave us comments on any of our social media platforms, including YouTube, and we'll shout them out later on here in the week. More to come. We're going to talk about Joel Eriksson Ek and Matt Zuccarello before today is done. Looking at 2021-2022 season expectations for the Wild's top line. More to come here on Locked On Wild. BetOnline.ag is back, and they are better than ever. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back for another football season. And as always, BetOnline.ag is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, BetOnline.ag continues to be the number one source for everything football. So head over to BetOnline.ag on your laptop or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code LOCKEDON to receive that welcome bonus. From football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. That's all at betonline.ag, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. Betonline.ag, where the game starts. Today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning, like is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? Let's be honest, nobody knows. And why wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You can save time and money when using rockauto.com. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? RockAuto.com is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. And RockAuto.com's prices are reliably low for every customer. So head to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Make sure to write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. All at rockauto.com. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your number one listen every day. We are talking 2021-2022 player expectations for this season. This is something that we'll do for the next few days as we go through the roster to try to figure out what we expect from many of the players that we'll see making this opening day roster for the Wild and some of the players that we could see get called up depending on what happens to the Wild from an injury standpoint or a lack of production standpoint. We move to the other two members of the Wild's top line. That includes Joel Eriksson Ek, and we will start with him. The new top line center for the Minnesota Wild was part of the third line for the Wild last year. Well, third in name, but let's be honest, there's really not a whole lot of difference between those top three lines for the Wild. They get rotated in plenty. But graduating from the Marcus Foligno, Jordan Greenway line up to the Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Zuccarello line, Joel Eriksson Ek is the answer to the question, will Kirill get a better center this season? So looking at Eriksson Ek's season, what is going to constitute a successful season for Joel Eriksson Ek? It boils down to a couple of different things. Eriksson Ek is one of the best defensive centers in the NHL. That's not a hot take. That's not something that I'm going to see on Old Takes Exposed on Twitter. That is a factual statement that has been backed up by many, many leather-bound books. And he added to his arsenal this past season by chipping in 19 goals and really helping give a nice offensive boost from that very physical line, the Grief Squad, as they've been called by several people on Twitter. So now, after the big contract extension for Eriksson Ek, locking him into to an 8-year deal, now he also gets the chance to play next to Kirill Kaprizov. So a successful season for Joel Eriksson Ek has to have both the defense that Eriksson Ek brings on a nightly basis, and now this added offense. You have to have both of them in order for this to be a successful season. Eriksson Ek showed he can do it. If he can continue to add to that offensive arsenal, this contract is going to look like a steal for the Wild in a couple of seasons, because they will have found their top line center and therefore won't have to continue the search that they've had to do for the last several seasons. So if Eriksson Ek can continue this offensive resurgence that he's shown, that it's not a fluke, that is going to help Kirill Kaprizov substantially. A lot of times last year where the top line, the Kaprizov line, would get into the opponent's offensive zone, and Kirill would be trying to do all sorts of things and just did not have the backing that he could potentially have this season with Eriksson Ek. So Joel Eriksson Ek, I think, is going to have a great chance to unlock the full version of Kirill Kaprizov. And so if he can keep pace and if he can keep things moving with this top line, and if he can help kind of unbully, definitely not a word, but I'm going to use it for these purposes. If he can help unbully the top line when they go up against some of the more physical teams in the NHL, it seems like the Wild were getting pushed around a little bit with that line because nobody on that line really had any sort of a presence physically. If Eriksson Ek can add that, if he can keep the offense going in the positive direction, and if he can show that he is the type of center that Kirill Kaprizov deserves to have on that top line, then it's going to be a very successful season for Joel Eriksson Ek in the first of his new extension. In terms of his numbers, projections, Eriksson Ek pegged to play in 79 games this year with 24 goals and 27 assists. So 51 points in 79 games after 30 points in 56 games last year. And again, I think with what Kirill Kaprizov brings in terms of a skill player, I think Eriksson Ek can top those numbers. He's going to have Matt Zuccarello as well, and the chemistry that Kaprizov and Zuccarello have put together is undeniable. So if you have those two working with Eriksson Ek in the middle, he's going to get a lot of opportunities. He's also going to facilitate a lot of opportunities for these two guys. And so 51 points in 79 games, I think that's definitely beatable by Eriksson Ek. And it's not going to shock me at all if he gets closer to 60 and maybe gets close to 30 goals for the Wild this year. How about that? That would be a welcome sight for this Wild team if he's able to get close to those numbers. So, yes, I think Eriksson Ek can outdo his projections or outshine his projections. It just depends on how quickly that line gels with those three up on top. And the final question for Eriksson Ek before we move on to Matt Zuccarello: are there any concerns with Eriksson Ek heading into this season? Yes, there is a big concern, and it's that the offense that Eriksson Ek brought to the table was kind of a one-hit wonder. If we see that regress and he goes back to more of just that defensive type presence that doesn't really add a lot of upside on offense, that's going to be a problem, because then you are you're falling into that same area that we were in last year, where You don't have a center worthy of Kaprizov's play with him. And also then that reflects poorly on the extension that they just signed Eriksson Ek to. So if his offense regresses and he doesn't really add a lot in that capacity for the Wild this year, that is definitely a concern heading into the season. So Joel Eriksson Ek, can he be the number one center for this team? I think he can, but we'll just have to wait and see how things play out on the ice. And the final member of that top line is Matt Zuccarello. Now, Zuccarello is the veteran of this group and a guy who I think is primed, based on what I'm seeing on Twitter and hearing, is primed for a very solid season for the Wild. He is going to be coming into this season healthy, which he did not last year. Had the full off season to get into a good routine and train and get his body ready for the full season. And his play so far has been sensational. So he is a guy that I think could really be a big factor for this Wild team, because if he gets to where he's red hot for a good majority of the year, then you have a truly unstoppable line. If Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov are playing at elite levels all season, that line then becomes a nightmare. So what would constitute a successful season for Matt Zuccarello? Well, it starts with building off of the chemistry that him and Kaprizov had throughout the course of the season. If they can build off of that and can further it to where you've got a couple of guys that are going to for sure get you 20 goals in Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov. If you can add a third to that top line, that is really going to go a long way with this team. And that gives them some scoring depth that they really just have not had over the last few seasons. If Zuccarello can more consistently produce as opposed to the hot start and cool finish, although I think that was more precipitated by Victor Rask being on that top line. If they have a more consistent center in Eriksson Ek, I think Zuccarello's production will stay nice and smooth throughout the course of the season. And honestly, I think if we just look at him as not being like the third wheel on this line, but a equal producer, I think that's probably the biggest key. If we don't look at Zuccarello as like the third guy on this line, like we looked at Victor Rask as the third guy last year, if we look at Zuccarello as an equal participant in what this first line is going to do, very successful season for him coming up here in 2021, 2022. In terms of a numbers perspective, Eriksson Ek, or Zuccarello, that is, had 35 points in 42 games. So really nice pace for him points-wise. 11 goals and 24 assists. He's pegged for 56 points in 67 games this year. 18 goals, 38 assists. Can he outproduce those numbers? And again, I say yes, because he's got Kirill Kaprizov playing with him again this year and going to have a better center that can more evenly distribute the puck and lead to some more consistent production from those three. So, yes, I think he can. I would not be shocked if every member of this top line finishes with 20-plus goals this season. That's how strongly I believe in those guys. I think they're all very capable of 60-plus points as well. So that ends up becoming a very, very solid top line. And that honestly might be one of the better ones that the Wild have thrown out there over the course of their history, which is crazy because we'll get a chance to see that live. And it's also crazy because you look back at the Wild's history. Yeah, it turns out the offense has been kind of few and far in between. So I think Zuccarello has a good chance to exceed his numbers just because of the Kaprizov effect and the anticipation of the Eriksson Ek effect as well. Any concerns heading into the season with Joel Eriksson, or with, boy, I've done that way too much. Any concerns with Matt Zuccarello heading into the season? Well, the injury bug, which is a concern for several players on every team in the NHL. The injury bug's a concern, but coming into this season healthy, I think is going to do some wonders for Zuccarello. And so that really, for me, is the only thing that concerns me heading into the season is if Zuccarello can avoid missing long stretches of games, because he has developed such a chemistry with Kaprizov. Just would be a shame if that's not able to be put on full display here this season. And so there you have it. 2021-2022 season expectations for Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Zuccarello, your expected top line for the Wild this season. That is going to bring us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Wild. Make sure that you follow us everywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well so that you don't miss out on any of the video content we have coming up as we gear closer and closer to the start of the season. Now that your first listen of the day is done, I would like to direct your attention to what should be your second listen of the day. And that, of course, is Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Host Scott Cullen leans on his decades of fantasy hockey insight and experience every day to help you be the expert of your fantasy league. Locked On Fantasy Hockey is free and available on all podcast platforms. You can also follow me, your host, Seth Topol, at Seth Topes on Twitter. Coming up on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Wild, we will take a look at the second line for the Minnesota Wild, that being Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman, and Jordan Greenway. We'll take a look at their season expectations as we get closer to the start of the season. We've got new episodes coming out every Monday through Friday. You can find them at Locked On Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.